Hello and welcome to this video where we'll come into input and output in Python. So this is probably one of the first lectures you have seen in Python if you're just following me for learning Python. But I think it is very interesting. So we will also go into a virtual environment so that you should have installed UV if you're working with me, or if you're using another virtual environment, that is fine, but I will show you how it works in UV for setting up a virtual environment and then setting up a Jupyter Notebook for the first time and then working with input and output if you haven't seen that before. So let's move on to Visual Studio Code. So here I am in Visual Studio Code. I have my terminal up here and nothing else. You can see it's an empty folder here. And for me here, it is not a GitHub repository, a Git repository. However, for you, you should definitely work in a GitHub repository and you should always commit and push this code. So if you're following along with my classes, this could be like you have a folder that is called video tutorials, and then you have this number for input and output, and then you have another folder for the next lecture, etc., etc. And then you have other folders for doing other things, for example, exercises. Okay, but we can start from scratch here. I don't have a virtual environment, so I'll create that, UV-VNV. So very importantly is that when you're doing UV-VENV, then it will create a virtual environment from scratch. So that means if you already have a virtual environment, a UV virtual environment, and you do UV-VEN, it will overwrite this. It will overwrite it, so it will disappear and you will have a new one. So that means that if you already have a .ven here, don't do UV-VENV, okay? So then you just do source.v, and then I do tab for autocomplete, and then I do bin, autocomplete, activate, tab for autocomplete. Okay, that is it. And I have activated my virtual environment, and you can see it with this parenthesis here that it's activated. Note that if you're using Windows, then it is source.ven/scripts. Exactly like this. Activate. Right? That is it. So this is for Windows and the previous one is for Mac. Okay? So now I have activated it. I just need to install one thing. UV pip install ipykernel, and that's it. It's installed. Command K to clear my terminal, or clear if you're in Windows. Okay, so now let's do this. Touch input output.ipnb. So this creates a new file called input-output.ipnb. I click on this one, I get this Jupyter Notebook here. So I will choose my kernel python.ven. So this is my virtual environment. I save this one, new markdown, and I will start with input and outputs. Okay, and I do Shift Enter to run the cell. And now it's a markdown cell. That means I can write text. And if I want to have it as a header like this, I need to do hashtag. Okay, so in Jupyter Notebook, you can combine markdown cells with Python cells, so that Python cells, we can run them directly here. And you'll see the outputs directly. This is in contrast to Python scripts that we'll come into later on. So here I will change this to click here, or you can do escape Y to change it to Python here. Okay, so now let's start with some printing, so to get some outputs. So print hello world is something everyone starts with. Run this one and you can see hello world typing out like this. Print my name is Kokshan. Yes, it's printing out. Cool. However, what if I want to have a variable which I can change? So I could have a name variable equals to Anna, for example. And then I can do print f-string. Your name is name. So here I take this variable here. So this variable will store the string, and then I interpolate it into here using f-string. So with f-string, I can place in the variable name here. So when I run this, Shift Enter or Alt Enter, your name is Anna. However, if I change this name to Joanna, then your name is Joanna instead. You see, this variable changes, and also this output here. Okay, what if we want to prompt someone for the name? We can do that also. So, for example, we could do name equals to input, what is your name? Age equals input, what is your age? And then I can print f-string name is age years old. So I run this one. Here is the prompt. What is your name? Press enter to confirm or escape to cancel. Okay. I can type, for example, Hannah. You are 25. Johanna is 25 years old. So this is getting an input from user. And then we could also, so now we have typed the age as 25. However, for example, we could do some calculations with the numbers that you get. Okay, so here, let me just do markdown here. So this is for inputs. Let's do something called type conversion. So that means we'll change a type into another type. For example, like this. Gravity, 9.82. Mass equals, if we do like this, input, enter your weight in kilograms. And then we do force equals to mass times gravity. And then we run this one, enter your weight in kilograms. If I write 65, and it says can't multiply sequence by none of type float. And what does this mean? It just means that we can't multiply 9.82, which is a floating number, to a string. So string cannot multiply to float. That is what this means. So how do I know that mass is a string? So we can do type of mass, and then we get string, right? So if I do type of gravity, it is float. And one thing you notice here is that in Jupyter Notebook, I actually don't need to print it out. The last statement is showing out as the representation of this object. We'll come back to something called dunder repr when we come into object-oriented programming, but that is for later. So no matter is that we have a string times a float, and that doesn't work. So we just copy this code here. And what we do is that we put a float in front of it. And we run this one, enter your weight, 65, and then, yes, the force has been calculated. So print f-string, we could do like this, force equals to, and then Newton. Something called the debugging version of the f-string so that you can get the variable written out directly. And you can see it equals to 638.30 blah, 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 1. And this is a rounding error. It cannot represent it exactly. So what you can do is, if I copy this one, and I do here, colon 0.1f, and run this one, and you can see it has rounded it. So this is how you format it a little bit nicer. No matter, the important part here was the float that we did. So this is the type coercion. So from a string, we converted it into a floating number. And then we have a floating number times a floating number, and that works. So what else? If we do, for example, number equals 5, like this, and I want to try to convert this one to float. So float of number, of course it doesn't work. So could not convert string to float 5. And I'll leave the error as this for now, but later on we will also do some error handling in this course. Let's see, we can go into some more types. And what types could we have? For example, we could have radius equals 7, we could have geometry equals circle, we could have is unit circle equals true or false, actually false here. Green inches equals 6.4. So here you have several variables. We can check the types using type. So radius, it's an int. Type of geometry, this should be a string. Type of is unit circle, it should be a bool. And then type of green inches should be float. Right, so int, string, bool, and float. So this is it. And this is, as you can see, the last statement is written out. So if I type out radius here, you can see it doesn't type out. And that is the way the Jupyter Notebook works, is that it takes the last statement or last expression and types it out. Yes. I'll delete. And with this, I strongly advise you that you work in Git and GitHub so that you do commit and push this to your GitHub so you have version control of your code. So in this lecture, we have gone through some Python very fundamental. So we have done some input and output. So output using print and input using input, and then getting in different values. And then we have done some type coercions to be able to do some calculations on the values that you get from the inputs. And also we looked into different types and we tested out variables. So these are very fundamental things that you really should know in Python in order to move on to the next concepts. So thank you for watching this video and see you in the next one. Bye.